From the Center for Western Priorities in Denver, this is the Road to 30 virtual tour. Here's the Executive Director of the Center for Western Priorities, Jennifer Rokala.
Hello, I'm Jen Rokala, the Executive Director of the Center for Western Priorities. Thank you for joining us on this sixth stop on the Road to 30 virtual tour to highlight the bold, future-looking proposal to protect 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. Scientists have urged us to protect at least 30% of the Earth's lands and waters as a necessary step to prevent the unraveling of the ecosystems that support life on this planet. The 30 by 30 goal is an important path to conserve nature, strengthen communities, and improve public health. Today, we're partnering with the National Parks Conservation Association to talk about the impact of climate change on our national parks and the ways in which national parks can be hubs for conservation by connecting larger landscapes. We'd like to start by recognizing that many of our national parks are on the traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples. As the 30 by 30 effort moves forward, collaborative conservation led by Indigenous communities will be essential to its success. This will be a 30-minute conversation, so we hope you'll stay with us for the next half hour. I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today. New Mexico Senator Tom Udall is here. He is leading the 30 by 30 initiative in the United States Senate and has a long history of being a leader in Congress for addressing climate change. Senator Udall, it's great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
Dr. Patrick Gonzalez is joining us today. He is the National Park Service Principal Climate Change Scientist, and he is an Associate Adjunct Professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He is also a lead author on 4 reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the organization awarded a share of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Gonzalez, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
And Matt Kirby with the National Parks Conservation Association is with us. Matt is the Director of Energy and Landscape Conservation. Matt, thank you for co-hosting this event with us today.
Thanks, excited for the conversation.
We'll have some time at the end for our panelists to respond to questions from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to ask it in the chat box on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We're going to start today with a brief presentation from Dr. Gonzalez about his scientific research on the current climate impacts occurring in our national parks and what we might see in the future. Dr. Gonzalez, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. First slide, please. It all starts with the exhaust pipe of your car or the smokestack of a power plant. Human sources pump twice as much carbon dioxide into the air than forests and oceans can naturally absorb. This carbon pollution has intensified the greenhouse effect, and all scientific evidence shows that it is the cause of the heating of the Earth. Next slide. Research by colleagues and me analyzed for the first time the patterns and magnitude of climate change across all of our national parks. Our results revealed that human-caused climate change has increased temperatures in the national park area at twice the rate of the country as a whole, and also caused more increases in aridity. U.S. national parks conserve the most intact natural areas in the country, and those areas happen to be in extreme environments, high elevations, the Arctic, and the arid Southwest. Next slide. In Bandelier National Monument and in New Mexico, and across the Western U.S., climate change has driven a recent drought that is the worst since the 1500s. Next slide. In Yosemite National Park and across the Western US, climate change has doubled wildfire over natural levels. Next slide. In Rocky Mountain National Park and across the Western US, climate change has doubled tree death from drought, bark beetle infestations, and wildfire. Other research has found many other impacts and future risks of climate change in our national parks. Next slide. The 30% protection by 2030 goal offers a chance to improve the protection of our national parks under climate change. National parks serve as the core of our conservation landscapes. Adding new protections will effectively extend the space for plant and animal species to connect to suitable climates. I'm working on new innovations to use climate change data to scientifically identify essential areas for lasting conservation. Last slide, please. The fundamental solution to conserving nature is reducing the carbon pollution from cars, power plants, and other human sources that causes climate change. Now, even if the current administration denies science and blocks action on climate change, the 24 states and Puerto Rico of the US Climate Alliance have agreed to meet the Paris Agreement goals and have reduced emissions 16% through renewable energy, like this rooftop solar panel in Lassen Volcanic National Park, through energy efficiency, public transit, and other sustainable actions. You too can do your part to reduce carbon pollution and help protect our national parks for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Senator Udall, you have a long track record of working to protect our public lands and natural heritage for future generations. Why do you think protecting 30% of our lands and waters is so critical?
Thank you, Jan. And that was a fascinating presentation by Dr. Gonzalez. And I would just repeat again what I think I heard him say is we produce twice as much greenhouse gases than nature or the environment can absorb. And so we've gotten things completely out of balance. And it's really human beings, when we talk about global warming, that are in charge of the thermostat. And so what this 30 by 30 resolution does, it's 30 by 30. We're talking 30% of nature and the oceans by 2030 to save nature in the oceans. And really what we're fighting out there is exactly what Dr. Gonzalez has talked about. We're fighting climate change, which is a big crisis, and we're fighting the nature crisis. And let me just throw some facts at you here that I think are pretty significant. We're in the 6th mass extinction with 1 million species threatened because of human activity. In New Mexico, we saw one of the largest migratory bird die-offs in recent decades. The U.S. is losing a football field's worth of nature every 30 seconds. So just imagine if you're in a small community and a football field's worth of nature evaporates every 30 seconds. I mean, you're wiping out a very strong force in the battle against climate change. And then finally, new reporting from the World Wildlife Foundation found that we have lost 2/3 of the world's wildlife in the past 50 years due to human activities. Well, it's my opinion, and I think many scientists hold this opinion out there, that human survival depends on natural ecosystems for clean air, for clean water, for medicine, for outdoor recreation, for energy, for food, for economic growth, and so much more. And so I would really call that our life support system. All we get from that system there, that life support or those ecosystems, is tremendously important. And in addition to that, 30 by 30 is also a means of tackling our overall climate goals, as Dr. Gonzalez laid them out, through natural carbon sequestration. Really what we're talking about there is nature is fully capable of taking carbon dioxide, a potent greenhouse gas, out of the environment, but only if we get the whole thing in balance. And we're quite out of whack now, as you've just heard. So thank you, Jen. Back to you.
Thank you, Senator Udall. Matt, it seems that we've long viewed national parks as standalone preserves, but going forward, how can parks serve as hubs of conservation, connecting broader landscapes?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks for that question, and thanks again for having me on the call. I think parks are at the heart of conserved land in this country, right? Already, national parks protect about 3% of the entire land mass of the country, which in turn is about a quarter of all protected lands in the country, right? So already parks are these anchors of conservation, and that has a wide range of benefits from a carbon sequestration point of view that the senator just mentioned, also the biodiversity benefits, right? Just last year, NPCA put out a report where we cataloged the critical habitat that parks provide and found that over half of the 400 some park units provide critical habitat for 600 species that are listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So, right, and so this is everything from humpback whales in Glacier Bay to the Shenandoah salamander. So parks are protecting plants and animals, big and small. That's the purpose they're serving now, as these sort of beating hearts of large landscapes. But that's nothing to say about the lands outside park boundaries, which I think is a little more of your question. Wildlife, plants, they don't respect boundaries, right? They need the lands outside of parks just as much as they need the lands inside of parks. And especially given the projected future climatic changes that Dr. Gonzalez talked about, it means that the lands outside of park boundaries are all the more important for us right now. So we need to start thinking of parks less as these protected islands and more sort of like the spokes of a wheel where we're looking outward from parks, focusing on protecting corridors, connecting parks to other protected lands to really allow species to move and adapt and migrate to a changing climate. So that's really the role I think that parks and PCA can play in this role.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Senator Udall, how do national parks factor into reaching the 30 by 30 goal to protect nature?
Well, the way I see it, and I think Dr. Gonzalez has done a really good job of laying this out, is that our national parks are a pristine environment. They absorb a lot of carbon. And I think, in fact, what I've been seeing as I travel across the country, we're kind of loving our national parks to death. So I think one of the ways we could help our national parks stay under the mandate of not having impairment is we could expand them. We frequently have public lands around national parks. These expanded ecosystems could support the national parks, could support additional people. And really what we're talking about when we talk about the national parks and the surrounding environment is keeping it healthy, because healthy forests, healthy ecosystems absorb carbon. And that's a big goal of the 30 by 30 effort that we're leading in the United States Senate. And I just want to say a word also for my co-sponsor, Senator Michael Bennett from Colorado. I know Jen and others, Matt and Dr. Gonzalez, know him very well. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Gonzalez, based on your presentation, climate change is already having a very real impact on parks themselves. How would conserving broader landscapes impact parks and the wildlife that inhabit them?
National parks serve as refugia. They are stable places where species can find homes where other disturbed lands have been losing habitat. Yet, as we've seen, climate change threatens that stability. Research by colleagues and me have found that 1/5 of the national park area is at high risk of biome shifts. Those are upslope or poleward shifts of major vegetation of forest into tundra or grassland into forest. In addition, research by colleagues and me has found that 1/8 of the US national park area is at high risk of invasive species like cheatgrass. So 1/5 vulnerable to these biome shifts, 1/8 vulnerable to invasive species. The 30 by 30 goal can help restore the integrity of the band of lands around national parks that are essential for ecosystem function and for protecting species from these major changes under climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Senator Udall, recently we've seen major conservation legislation passed into law, including the John Dingell Conservation Management and Recreation Act and the Great American Outdoors Act. These bills had broad bipartisan support. It seems like there's actually political will to come together to support conservation legislation. Will we see Congresses in the future protect more areas as national parks and also ensure that they are adequately funded?
I think so. I mean, I think the very positive thing, first of all, about the Great American Outdoors Act is we finally stepped forward in a big way to deal with parks and their maintenance. You know, we just haven't been doing enough when it comes to national parks, maintaining the infrastructure that's in the parks that allows our citizens to enjoy those parks. And so we've stepped forward with billions of dollars to tackle that. In addition, one of the things, and when we're talking about parks and we're talking about 30 by 30, you know, and I know our focus today is on parks, but 30 by 30 is also about working lands, sustainable agriculture, good grazing techniques, reforestation, and urban green spaces. Those are all very important. And I think one of the things that Dr. Gonzalez talked about that I think's tremendously important is making sure our forests are healthy so they can do the job in terms of that carbon capture. So I love the motto that says, protect the best and restore the rest. So when we're working with areas, and we're working, for example, I have a piece of legislation on wildlife corridors. When we're working to protect the wildlife, we're also helping restore the habitats that the wildlife live in, and once again, capturing carbon through restored forests and restored ecosystems.
Thank you, Senator. Matt, same question for you. Do you expect future Congresses to protect more areas as national parks?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the senator just talked about all the great bipartisan legislation that has passed, and the fact that here in the early 2019, right, we saw Congress protect more than 1 million acres of wilderness, create 5 new national monuments, a few of them managed by the Park Service. And all that is to say right now, during one of the most politically polarized times in modern history, we have seen major public lands protection bills pass Congress overwhelmingly. Legislation that's passed every decade, let alone 2 in as many years. So even if we can't agree on much right now in this country, I think we can all agree that we need to protect more places, and that includes national parks, and we don't see that changing anytime soon.
Thanks, Matt. Dr. Gonzalez, conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030 would require efforts from multiple government agencies, including the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. What role can the National Park Service itself play in conserving broader landscapes going forward?
The National Park Service has been working closely with the Forest Service, with the Bureau of Land Management, excuse me, and the Department of Defense, and with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, on the conservation of areas adjacent to national parks and marine protected areas adjacent to coastal national parks. This is part of a policy that was introduced by John Jarvis, the director of the National Park Service under President Obama, which situates national parks as the core of conservation landscapes. And many of the national parks in the West are actually situated at the center of national forests. And so parks have been collaborating on fire management, on identification of biodiversity corridors, and on joint management of marine areas, such as in the Channel Islands National Park.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Senator Udall, in your experience, how have local community efforts resulted in designating new national parks or conserving important places, and how can people get involved?
Those, Jan, those efforts are absolutely crucial to our efforts moving forward, whether it's 30 by 30, protecting national parks, expanding national parks, doing a better job with the Forest Service and managing forests so that they're in a healthy state. All of that is a coalition building effort. And I just give you one little example, and it's taking place all across the country. We know many of the monuments that were designated in the Obama-Biden administration. In fact, in New Mexico, we have close to 750,000 acres that were designated in 2 new national monuments, one in northern New Mexico, one in southern New Mexico. And what happened there is local people got together and realized there was a real benefit to their community to be involved in having a new national monument. It helped the economy. It helped in terms of all the outdoor industries that are present right there. New Mexico has billions of dollars every year that's generated in terms of the outdoor recreation industry. So all of that, the local coalitions know. And I was always so proud of the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance and the coalitions around these 2 national monuments when the 2 secretaries came out, Secretary Ken Salazar and Secretary Sally Jewell, and they said, you know, you local folks, you coalitions have done all the great work. You've built the consensus that needs to happen. So what I would urge people to do is look at an area you care about, join with the coalition, try to widen your coalition and work with everyone so they see the great opportunities to moving forward with additional monuments. That's one good area. But let's not forget local level urban parks. We have a National Wildlife Refuge in Albuquerque, an urban area. That can, all of those kinds of things I mentioned in New Mexico can happen across the country and are happening, and we need more of them to save the planet. Thank you, Jan, and back to you.
Thanks, Senator. Matt, what is NPCA doing to engage local communities, not only in support of national parks, but conserving the landscapes around them?
You know, that's a great question. I think that this provides an incredible opportunity to bring communities into the conversation about what conservation means and really build the political will to help us get to 35. Parks are already these iconic places that are these sort of living classrooms that teach people about the natural world and teach people about the cultural history of our country. And right now they're telling a very different story, right? They're telling the story of climate change, the story that Patrick told, and what that means for people and communities, and what that means for the importance of adaptation efforts, building resilience into these landscapes, actually restoring degraded lands, right? And the importance of protecting our cultural heritage and help telling this next phase of the story. But a lot of communities on the ground, we call these gateway communities, the communities that are near national parks, right? They know that their bread is buttered by the nearby national park, by the tourism industry. And they also know that a lot of those recreation opportunities that people are coming to visit for happen on the lands outside the parks, right? So whether you're a hunting guide in Montana or a river rafter in Moab or a hotel owner in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, you know that people are coming to visit the park, and a lot of what they're doing and a lot of the economic spending that's happening is happening on the lands outside of parks and in those communities. So these people know that managing the lands outside of parks often is just as important as managing the land inside of parks. So they're really natural partners in that way. And a lot of people are already there, right? They know the value of these lands, and they're going to be key constituencies to help us sell this vision and really get on board moving forward.
Thanks, Matt. And as a follow-up, are there specific parks and landscapes you see as particularly critical in meeting the 30 by 30 goal?
Ooh, there are so many landscapes. Where we're trying to think of how every unit is really part of its broader landscape. I would say though, there's sort of two ways that we can think of it. First, there are sort of the landscapes that are a biological imperative that provide connectivity and provide these multi-state intact landscapes, right? Places like the lands right to the east of Bears Ears National Monument, right around Hogan Reef National Monument. If you were to protect those lands, they would fill a protected corridor stretching almost all the way from the Grand Canyon to Canyonlands National Park in Utah. But the other type of landscape are the ones that we can use to engage people, to use that storytelling aspect of the Park Service to help us tell the story of 30 by 30. So an example of that would be the Appalachian Trail, which extends more than 2,000 miles, is only about 1,000 miles wide, or 1,000 feet wide on average, but it's still one of the most biodiverse park units because it stretches across 14 states across the park unit. So while it's never going to function as a wildlife corridor per se, because 1,000 feet wide just isn't going to cut it most of the time, it can function as sort of a narrative corridor to allow us to talk about these different land management ownerships and how we sort of manage across a very fragmented landscape stretching from Georgia to Maine. So we're really looking at the full sort of rich history of all the park units and how they can all bring a piece of the puzzle.
Well, thanks, Matt. Now we'd like to hear from those of you tuning in today. If you have a question for one of our panelists, feel free to ask it in the chat window on YouTube or Facebook. So our first question is the Road to 30 also an international initiative? Is there an opportunity to introduce it via an amendment to the Paris Climate Agreement? And Senator Udall or Dr. Gonzalez, would you like to take a crack at that question?
I can. I'll let the senator answer if you want to. Or
I think the simple answer, Dr. Gonzalez, and you can build on my answer. I think the simple answer is yes. The international community, in some cases, I think is ahead of the United States now. The climate entity that Dr. Gonzalez is a part of, one of the scientists. These are scientists working all around the world, in 193 countries, contributing scientists, working collaboratively, trying to figure out where we head. And many of these same kinds of goals, like 30-30, are goals that have been focused in. We just recently had an international meeting on biodiversity. That also has had targets in the past that have moved us in the direction we need to go. So I think what we need to think about is do our job in the United States of America and do it well with 30 by 30 and the efforts in the national parks, but also collaborate with countries around the world on climate change, on extinction, on saving nature. And that is going to be tremendously important, I think, to get us to where we need to be on the climate change goals we have in front of us.
I can just add that the 30 by 30 goal is a goal of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and it is linked to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They are working together to implement both this biodiversity goal and the goals to reduce climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. I think we have time for one more question. So the second question is, what about the role of national, state, what about the role of national and state wildlife refuges, forests, and other public lands? National parks are designed for human activity. Other public lands were created to preserve nature. Matt, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Parks definitely are created to allow people to come in and see places. That does not mean that they are not places where real conservation happens. As Dr. Gonzalez said, they are refugia for so many species. But as you mentioned, just as important are all these other places, the wildlife refuges, is the forests, the state lands. The senator talked about working agricultural lands, right? There is no silver bullet for the 30 by 30 effort. What we are trying to say as NPCA is parks can act as a core, and we need to work from what we have and build out from there and figure how we can co-manage across all these different land management ownership.
Thanks, Matt. Senator Udall, anything to add?
I totally agree with what Matt said, and I think it's just tremendously important that all of us work together, starting at the local level and the great consensus building that's done there. It then flows over into the state and the federal government activities. And we are going to make it forward pretty dramatically. If all of us work together, we can get this done. We can equalize what we need to in terms of climate, and we can also save nature.
Thank you, Senator. And Dr. Gonzalez, any parting thoughts?
I wanted to reiterate what Senator Udall said about the importance of forests and the 30 by 30 goal for conserving forests and improving the health of forests. Research by colleagues and I have shown that the forests and other vegetation in California contains enough carbon equivalent to 1 year of emissions from every American in the cities of Los Angeles, Kansas City, Miami, Dallas, Charlotte, and Boston. So conserving the forests conserves biodiversity, and it also naturally reduces climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Well, that will wrap up our National Parks Road to 30 virtual event. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us this afternoon, and especially thank Senator Udall, Dr. Patrick Gonzalez, Matt Kirby, and the entire team at the National Parks Conservation Association. We appreciate your passion and commitment to the important conservation work each of you do. If you'd like more information about the 30 by 30 initiative or to watch any previous Road to 30 virtual tour events, please visit our website at roadto30.org. See you soon.
Thank you.